Jungkook never imagined the person he trusted most would become the one standing at the center of his greatest heartbreak. One devastating accusation shattered years of loyalty in a single moment, leaving Jimin frozen beneath the weight of suspicion he never expected to face. As the members watched their unbreakable bond collapse, every hidden glance, every unexplained absence, and every painful silence suddenly seemed to confirm the worst. But beneath the crushing betrayal lay a truth so unimaginable that it would leave Jungkook unable to speak, and force everyone to question who had really been sacrificing everything all along. For years, Jimin and Jungkook had shared a bond that everyone around them believed could survive anything. It was not built on grand promises or dramatic declarations, but through countless quiet moments that only those closest to them could truly understand. Long rehearsals that stretched past midnight, exhausting schedules that tested both body and mind, and silent encouragement exchanged with nothing more than a reassuring glance had slowly woven an unbreakable connection between them. Whenever one of them stumbled under the pressure, the other was always there, offering strength without expecting recognition. Their friendship had become the emotional center that quietly held everything together, even during the most difficult chapters of their lives. To Jin, Sugar, J-Hope, and Taehyung, the two of them seemed inseparable, almost as though they instinctively understood each other's thoughts before a single word was spoken. Yet beneath that comforting image, subtle changes had begun to appear. Jimin's warm smile lingered for shorter moments than before, his eyes often carrying an exhaustion he carefully tried to hide. Jungkook, once completely at ease around him, had started noticing small details that refused to leave his mind: unexpected phone calls that ended the moment he approached, unexplained disappearances after rehearsals, and an unsettling distance that quietly grew wider with every passing day. None of it seemed significant on its own, but together they formed a pattern that slowly planted seeds of doubt inside Jungkook's heart. He fought against those thoughts, reminding himself of everything they had endured together, yet every unanswered question made trusting his instincts increasingly difficult. While everyone else continued believing that nothing had changed, an invisible crack had already begun spreading beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when one heartbreaking misunderstanding would bring everything crashing down. As the days passed, the distance between them became impossible to ignore. Jimin still fulfilled every responsibility with unwavering professionalism, arriving early, practicing until his muscles trembled with exhaustion, and offering the same gentle encouragement to every member. Yet whenever rehearsals ended, he quietly disappeared before anyone could ask where he was going. His once effortless laughter became increasingly rare, replaced by thoughtful silence and tired smiles that never quite reached his eyes. Taehyung noticed the change first, while sensed an unspoken burden weighing heavily on the group. Jin attempted to brighten the atmosphere with light-hearted jokes, Sugar observed everything without saying much, and J-Hope worked tirelessly to keep everyone's spirits high. Even so, a lingering uneasiness settled over them like an approaching storm. Jungkook tried convincing himself that Jimin simply needed space, but every unanswered message and every avoided moment of eye contact made that explanation harder to believe. The trust that had once come so naturally was now competing with uncertainty, and uncertainty had a dangerous way of growing louder than reason. Unknown to everyone else, Jimin was carrying a responsibility he refused to share, believing that protecting those he loved meant bearing every burden alone. He accepted the loneliness that came with that choice, unaware that his silence was slowly creating the very misunderstanding he had hoped to prevent. With each passing day, two hearts that had always moved in perfect harmony drifted farther apart, neither realizing that fate was quietly preparing a single moment capable of changing both of their lives forever. Everything changed on a rain-soaked evening when an anonymous envelope arrived at the practice studio. There was no sender's name, only a collection of photographs and carefully selected documents that seemed to tell a devastating story. Every image appeared to place Jimin in secret meetings with people the group had never heard him mention. A series of timestamps suggested he had been leaving rehearsals under false pretenses, while several blurred photographs captured him handing over a thick folder to a stranger in an underground parking garage. Standing beside the scattered pages, Jungkook felt his heartbeat pound louder with every piece of supposed evidence. Each photograph seemed to answer the questions that had haunted him for weeks, yet the answers felt almost too painful to accept. RM immediately urged everyone to remain calm, reminding them that appearances could be manipulated, but uncertainty spread through the room before reason had a chance to catch up. Jin stared silently at the photographs. Sugar's expression hardened with suspicion. J-Hope struggled to believe what he was seeing, and Taehyung instinctively looked toward the empty hallway where Jimin had disappeared only minutes earlier. For the first time since their bond had begun, Jungkook found himself wondering whether trust alone was enough to overcome the weight of what seemed to be undeniable proof. Meanwhile, completely unaware of the storm gathering behind him, Jimin walked through the pouring rain with a weary expression, clutching a small sealed envelope close to his chest as though it contained something far more precious than anyone could possibly imagine. The distance between truth and betrayal had never been thinner, and one irreversible decision was about to push them beyond the point where either of them believed forgiveness was still possible. Jungkook could no longer silence the questions echoing inside his mind. The envelope had transformed every recent memory into something unrecognizable, twisting ordinary moments into fragments that now seemed filled with hidden meaning. Every late-night departure, every exhausted smile, every gentle reassurance Jimin had offered suddenly felt like pieces of a puzzle leading toward betrayal. He desperately wanted to reject the conclusion forming in his heart, but the fear of being deceived by the person he trusted most was stronger than the hope that there had to be another explanation. As the night deepened, he replayed every photograph again and again, searching for a detail that would prove the evidence wrong. Instead, each careful glance only strengthened the illusion that Jimin had been hiding an entirely different life. Elsewhere, Jimin moved through the city with heavy steps, his shoulders slumped beneath the invisible weight he had carried alone for far too long. The sealed envelope remained tightly pressed against his chest, protected from the rain as though it were more valuable than anything he owned. His expression revealed neither fear nor guilt, only quiet determination mixed with profound exhaustion. He paused briefly beneath a streetlight, taking a slow breath before continuing toward an unfamiliar building hidden among the crowded streets. Unknown to everyone searching for him, every visit to that place had been part of a promise he refused to break, even if it meant allowing those closest to him to misunderstand everything. Back at the dorm, the atmosphere grew unbearably tense. RM urged patience, reminding everyone that truth rarely revealed itself through appearances alone. Jin worried that confronting Jimin without understanding the full story would only deepen the wound already forming between them. Sugar remained silent, sensing that someone had deliberately arranged the evidence to be discovered at exactly the right moment. J-Hope struggled to hold the group together, while Taehyung became increasingly convinced that Jimin's recent sadness had never resembled the behavior of someone hiding betrayal. Yet before anyone could stop him, Jungkook quietly left the room, driven by equal parts anger, heartbreak, and desperation. He had made up his mind to follow Jimin himself, unaware that the truth waiting at the end of that journey would shatter every accusation he was preparing to make. Jungkook followed from a distance, careful not to let the sound of his footsteps blend with the rhythm of the rain. His heart was torn between hope and suspicion, each emotion fighting for control with every street Jimin crossed. Countless memories flashed through his mind, the days they had celebrated small victories together, the nights they had encouraged one another through exhaustion, and the unwavering trust that had once seemed impossible to break. Yet those memories were now overshadowed by the photographs hidden inside the envelope at the dorm. Every step forward felt like another step away from the friendship he had treasured for years. Jimin finally stopped in front of an aging building tucked away from the city's bright lights. Its faded walls and quiet entrance gave away nothing about the purpose of the place. He looked around cautiously before slipping inside, still holding the sealed envelope close to his chest. Jungkook remained outside, his breathing unsteady as countless possibilities raced through his mind. The anonymous photographs had prepared him to expect the worst, and every passing second inside that mysterious building only fueled his growing fear that the painful accusations forming in his heart might be true. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Jungkook wrestled with the urge to walk away, but the uncertainty had already consumed him. Just as he gathered the courage to enter, the front door slowly opened. A man wearing a dark coat stepped outside, carrying the very envelope Jimin had protected so carefully. The stranger glanced around briefly before disappearing into the rain without noticing Jungkook standing in the shadows. From where he stood, it looked as though Jimin had willingly handed over something incredibly important. The sight struck Jungkook like a blade to the heart. In that single moment, every remaining thread of trust began to unravel. Inside the building, however, Jimin remained seated alone, his head lowered and his hands trembling from emotional exhaustion rather than fear. His eyes lingered on an empty chair across from him, as though silently hoping someone would one day understand why he had chosen to carry this burden in complete silence. Unaware that Jungkook had witnessed only the most misleading part of the truth, Jimin quietly closed his eyes, believing his sacrifice was still protecting the people he loved. Outside, Jungkook turned away with tears hidden beneath the rain, convinced he had finally seen undeniable proof of betrayal. Neither of them realized that someone else had been watching both of them from a parked car across the street, waiting for the misunderstanding to reach the point of no return. The following morning, the practice studio felt colder than ever before. A familiar energy that usually filled every rehearsal had vanished, replaced by an uneasy silence that no one knew how to break. Jimin arrived as he always did, greeting everyone with a faint smile that barely concealed the exhaustion etched across his face. Dark circles lingered beneath his eyes, and every movement suggested he had not slept at all. Still, he focused entirely on practice, determined not to let his private struggles affect the team. What he didn't know was that Jungkook had spent the entire night replaying the previous evening in his mind, allowing doubt to harden into conviction. Throughout rehearsal, Jungkook avoided every opportunity to look at Jimin. The effortless synchronization they had once shared disappeared, replaced by awkward hesitation and emotional distance. RM noticed their unusual lack of coordination almost immediately. Jin exchanged worried glances with J-Hope, while Sugar quietly observed every subtle change in their expressions. Taehyung sensed that something irreversible was approaching, but neither Jimin nor Jungkook seemed willing to take the first step. As the rehearsal ended, Jimin instinctively turned toward Jungkook, hoping to bridge the silence that had stretched between them for days. Before he could even take another step, Jungkook slowly backed away. The hurt in his eyes was impossible to miss. It was no longer simple confusion. It had become heartbreak mixed with disappointment. Without saying a word, his expression carried a painful accusation that struck Jimin more deeply than any spoken sentence ever could. For the first time, Jimin realized that whatever had been hidden in silence had finally reached Jungkook in the worst possible way. A heavy ache settled inside Jimin's chest as he watched Jungkook walk away. He wanted to stop him, to explain everything, to reveal the truth he had protected for so long. Yet the promise he had made still bound him, forcing him to remain silent even as the person he cared about most slipped farther out of reach. Unknown to either of them, the mysterious figure who had orchestrated the anonymous envelope watched from a distance once again. Hidden behind another carefully planned move, the mastermind smiled with quiet satisfaction. The misunderstanding had grown exactly as intended, and the next piece of the plan would ensure that Jungkook's accusation against Jimin became impossible to take back. That evening, an emergency meeting brought all 7 members together in the conference room. The atmosphere was unusually heavy, with no casual laughter or light-hearted conversation to soften the tension. A manager placed another sealed package on the table, explaining that it had been delivered anonymously only moments earlier. Inside were more photographs, additional documents, and a storage drive labeled with nothing but Jimin's name. The collection appeared even more convincing than the first. Carefully edited images seemed to place Jimin in repeated meetings with the same mysterious individual, while printed schedules suggested he had intentionally hidden entire portions of his daily routine. Every page was designed to eliminate doubt and replace it with certainty. Jungkook's hands tightened as he examined the contents. The memory of watching Jimin hand the envelope to the stranger the previous night merged seamlessly with the manufactured evidence lying before him. His heart resisted the conclusion, but his mind struggled to find another explanation. The conflict inside him became almost unbearable. He wanted to believe the friend who had stood beside him through countless hardships, yet everything placed before him seemed to insist that trust had been nothing more than an illusion. RM carefully inspected the documents, his instincts telling him that something about the evidence felt unnaturally perfect. Sugar shared the same concern, quietly noticing that every photograph showed only a single angle, as if someone had deliberately avoided capturing the full scene. Jin worried less about the papers and more about the damage already visible in Jungkook's expression. J-Hope feared that hesitation was running out, while Taehyung became increasingly convinced that someone was manipulating events with remarkable precision. But suspicion alone was not enough to erase what everyone had already seen. At that exact moment, Jimin entered the room, unaware of the new accusations waiting for him. No one spoke. The silence itself became more painful than any accusation could have been. Jungkook slowly lifted his eyes toward Jimin, and for the first time in years, the unwavering trust that had always connected them seemed to disappear completely. Neither of them realized that the final piece of the deception had already been set into motion, and within minutes, a single piece of undeniable evidence would surface, one that threatened to destroy any remaining chance of believing Jimin's innocence forever. Before anyone could gather their thoughts, the conference room door opened once again. A staff member rushed inside carrying a laptop that had just been delivered by an unknown courier. The storage drive from the anonymous package had already been examined, and its contents were ready to be played. Every member instinctively turned toward the screen as the first video began. The footage appeared crystal clear, showing Jimin entering the same secluded building on multiple occasions. Moments later, the mysterious man emerged, and from the carefully chosen camera angle it looked unmistakably as though confidential files were being exchanged. The recording ended before anyone could see what happened afterward, leaving only the image of Jimin handing over the envelope. A suffocating silence settled over the room. Jungkook felt the last fragments of hope slipping away. His chest tightened as disbelief gave way to overwhelming disappointment. Every instinct urged him to defend Jimin, but the evidence seemed relentless, carefully constructed to leave no room for another interpretation. He searched Jimin's face for confusion, denial, or anger, yet found only heartbreaking exhaustion. To Jungkook, that silence felt like an admission. To Jimin, it was the unbearable cost of keeping a promise he believed was protecting everyone else. RM leaned forward, refusing to accept the footage without question. Years of experience had taught him that the clearest images could still hide the greatest lies. Sugar noticed something unusual in the video's timing, a tiny jump between frames that suggested the recording had been edited. Taehyung's attention remained fixed not on the screen, but on Jimin's trembling hands. They were not the hands of someone cornered by guilt. They were the hands of someone watching everything he had sacrificed collapse before his eyes. Despite those doubts, the emotional weight became too much for Jungkook to carry. Weeks of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, anonymous messages, hidden meetings, and the devastating footage converged into one unbearable conclusion. His heart could no longer separate fear from truth. He slowly stepped toward Jimin, his expression filled with pain deeper than anger. Every memory they had shared seemed to shatter inside him, replaced by the crushing belief that the person he had trusted above everyone else had chosen secrecy over honesty. Jimin lifted his eyes, silently pleading for just a little more time, but no words came. The promise that had forced him into silence still held him captive. In that heartbreaking moment, Jungkook's restraint finally broke. The accusation he had fought so hard to suppress was about to escape, setting in motion a confrontation that neither of them would ever forget. Unknown to everyone in the room, the true architect of the deception was standing just outside the building, watching events unfold exactly as planned, convinced that once Jungkook spoke those irreversible words, the bond between them would be destroyed forever. The air inside the conference room became almost impossible to breathe. Every pair of eyes shifted between Jungkook and Jimin, as though time itself had frozen in anticipation of what would happen next. No one dared interrupt the silence. Even the faint hum of the lights overhead seemed louder than usual, amplifying the weight of every unspoken emotion hanging in the room. For years, they had faced endless challenges together, but never had they stood on opposite sides of a divide this deep. Jungkook's heart pounded against his chest as countless memories collided with the evidence spread across the table. He remembered every promise they had silently kept, every hardship they had overcome together, every moment when Jimin had been the first to offer comfort whenever life became overwhelming. Those memories begged him to trust the person standing before him. Yet the photographs, the videos, and the carefully orchestrated trail of secrecy demanded the opposite. Caught between love and suspicion, his emotions finally reached their breaking point. Unable to carry the unbearable conflict any longer, Jungkook looked directly into Jimin's weary eyes. What he saw was not the confidence of someone hiding a victory, but the quiet sorrow of someone who had already accepted losing everything. Even so, the pain clouding Jungkook's judgment was too powerful to overcome. The accusation escaped before compassion could stop it, echoing through the room like a crack of thunder. In that single devastating moment, years of unwavering trust shattered, leaving behind only silence and heartbreak. Taehyung knelt beside the fallen folder with trembling hands. The room remained silent, but the silence had changed. Moments earlier it had been filled with judgment. Now it carried an uneasy sense that something far more complicated was hidden beneath the surface. As he carefully gathered the scattered papers, one sealed document slipped free and landed at his feet. Across the top was an official emblem, followed by several pages stamped with dates that matched every mysterious disappearance Jimin had made over the past month. None of the documents resembled confidential company files. Instead, they appeared to record a long and deeply personal commitment that Jimin had deliberately kept away from everyone. RM immediately stepped closer, studying the pages without jumping to conclusions. Sugar noticed handwritten notes covering the margins, each one outlining appointments, payments, and carefully planned arrangements made under Jimin's name alone. Jin's eyes widened as he realized that the amounts recorded were far greater than anyone would quietly shoulder without a powerful reason. J-Hope could hardly believe what he was seeing. Every page contradicted the story told by the anonymous photographs. Jungkook remained frozen where he stood. The certainty that had driven his accusation began to crack for the first time. He looked from the documents to Jimin, whose exhausted expression had not changed. There was still no anger in his eyes, only overwhelming sadness, as though he had expected this painful misunderstanding from the very beginning. The confidence that had fueled Jungkook's accusation slowly gave way to an unfamiliar fear. What if he had mistaken sacrifice for betrayal? What if every suspicious action had been hiding an act of selfless devotion instead of deception? Every member turned toward the stranger. No one recognized him except Jimin, whose face immediately filled with alarm rather than surprise. For the first time since the accusations began, genuine panic appeared in Jimin's eyes. He quickly stood, not to protect himself, but to stop the man from speaking. Yet before Jimin could reach him, the stranger took a deep, shaky breath and looked directly at Jungkook. The room fell completely still. The words about to leave the stranger's mouth threatened to destroy every lie that had been carefully planted, and forced Jungkook to confront a truth so heartbreaking that he would never forgive himself for the accusation he had made. The stranger's voice trembled as he finally gathered the courage to speak. Every word seemed painfully heavy, as though he had carried the burden of this secret for far too long. He explained that Jimin had never come to that secluded building to betray anyone. Every visit had been part of a private mission that Jimin had insisted remain completely confidential, even if it meant sacrificing his own reputation. The envelopes, the meetings, the unexplained absences, and every document scattered across the table had all been connected to that single promise. Jimin had repeatedly asked that no one, not even Jungkook or the other members, ever learn what he was doing until everything had been completed. As the explanation continued, the room fell into stunned silence. The mysterious man revealed that someone had approached him weeks earlier, offering a large sum of money in exchange for copies of surveillance footage and carefully selected photographs. At first he had refused, unaware of the true purpose. But the individual returned several times, requesting only fragments of recordings rather than complete videos. The stranger eventually realized that the footage was being edited to make innocent meetings appear suspicious. Horrified by what he had unknowingly contributed to, he had spent days searching for Jimin, desperate to confess before irreversible damage was done. RM slowly turned back toward the laptop, displaying the anonymous video. This time, instead of watching the carefully edited sequence, Sugar rewound the file frame by frame. Almost immediately, the missing sections became obverse. Entire moments had been removed. Jungkook felt the ground beneath him disappear. His breathing became shallow as every accusation echoed painfully inside his mind. The certainty that had once seemed undeniable dissolved into crushing guilt. He looked toward Jimin, remembering the exhaustion in his eyes, the sleepless nights, the quiet smiles, and every silent attempt to avoid causing worry. None of it had been deception. It had been sacrifice. Jimin lowered his head, unable to hide the tears that finally escaped. He had accepted being misunderstood because he believed protecting the promise was more important than protecting himself. But seeing Jungkook's shattered expression hurt far more than any accusation ever could. He had never feared losing his reputation. The only thing he had truly feared was losing Jungkook's trust. Then the stranger reached into his coat and carefully placed one final sealed file on the conference table. "This," he whispered, "it contains the full truth." Every eye locked onto the unopened file. No one moved. Deep inside, Jungkook already sensed that whatever lay inside would not only prove Jimin's innocence, it would reveal a sacrifice so profound that it would change the meaning of everything they believed had happened until that moment. With trembling hands, RM carefully opened the sealed file while the others stood motionless, almost afraid of what they were about to discover. Inside were neatly organized records, signed agreements, medical reports, financial statements, and dozens of handwritten notes bearing only one signature, Jimin's. As each page was turned, the carefully constructed illusion of betrayal crumbled piece by piece. There was no evidence of disloyalty. Instead, every document told the story of someone who had quietly sacrificed everything to protect the people he cared about. Months earlier, Jimin had learned of a serious legal and financial dispute involving a charitable project that several people close to the group had supported. Through no fault of their own, confidential information connected to the project had been stolen and was being used by an unknown individual to threaten innocent staff members. Rather than burden the members during one of the busiest periods of their careers, Jimin had secretly worked with legal advisors and investigators to recover the missing records before they could be used to damage countless lives. Every unexplained meeting had been part of that effort. Every envelope had contained recovered evidence, not leaked information. The stranger had been one of the investigators helping him trace the source of the stolen files. The handwritten notes revealed something even more heartbreaking. Again and again, Jimin had written the same quiet reminder to himself in the margins, to keep the others safe, no matter the personal cost. He had anticipated that his silence might make him appear suspicious. He had even written that if protecting everyone meant becoming the one they doubted, he was willing to accept that pain. Reading those words felt like watching Jimin relive his loneliness on every page. Jungkook's vision blurred with tears. Every memory he had questioned now returned with painful clarity. Jimin had never been pulling away because he no longer cared. He had been distancing himself because the burden he carried grew heavier each day, and he refused to let anyone else share it. The sleepless nights, the tired smiles, the hidden exhaustion, the unexplained absences, they had all been signs of quiet devotion, not betrayal. No one in the room spoke. Jin lowered his head, J-Hope covered his mouth in disbelief, Sugar silently closed the file after reading the final page, and even struggled to steady his breathing. Taehyung looked toward Jungkook, whose expression had completely collapsed under the weight of overwhelming regret. The accusation that had seemed justified only moments earlier now felt like the deepest wound he could ever have inflicted. Jimin slowly lifted his eyes. They were filled not with resentment, but with heartbreak. He had prepared himself to lose trust. What he had never prepared for was seeing Jungkook blame himself so completely. As the silence stretched between them, Jungkook took an unsteady step forward, unable to hold back the tears any longer. The distance that misunderstanding had created was finally beginning to disappear, but healing the damage would require far more than uncovering the truth. The hardest moment of all was still waiting, as Jungkook prepared to face Jimin with a heart overwhelmed by guilt, remorse, and the desperate hope that forgiveness might still be possible.